Chapter 3, different types of hacking, from hacking the man to hacking the moon. There are multiple types of hacking. These are the ones that we're going to cover in this chapter. The first one's denial of service. The second one's network protocol attacks. The third one's social engineering. The fourth one's web application attacks. And the fifth one's binary attacks. And the last one is cryptanalysis. Let's go through denial of service. I bet a lot of you have heard the term DOS or DDoS or DOS. Do not confuse this DOS with the DOS that existed before Windows. It was a Microsoft product. That one stands for Disk Operating System. This one stands for denial of service. So if you see a hacker threaten to DOS or DOS you on the internet, this is what they mean. A DOS is basically a flooding of a service to overwhelm it. It makes the service no longer available because it's overwhelmed, and it's completely brute, which can be stopped at the door, or it's targeting bottlenecks, which can be stopped on the pattern. So how do they do that? Denial of service is typically done by just sending a lot of requests to your service. So for example, if you're a home computer, they just send traffic from 3 different servers to your computer, and no matter how fast your internet is, all of its bandwidth is going to be used by this, or to your phone. And then you can't access any other website. That would be a denial of service. It's also illegal, so any server or any internet infrastructure that's used for denial of service is doing illegal activity, and the police usually follows that and acts with that accordingly. There's a better type of denial of service that's called distributed denial of service. It's usually abbreviated as DDoS. It's important not to confuse DDoS with DOS, because a lot of attackers online, or a lot of people who don't really know better, just claim that they're going to DDoS you or they can DDoS people. But DDoS is not that simple. What these attackers really do is that they only DOS you. They can't do the distributed denial of service, which is a very advanced attack. Instead, they can do denial of service. So denial of service is not that hard to protect, but distributed denial of service is almost impossible to protect. The difference is that it's also denial of service, but it comes from a million different sources instead of 1 or 2. And it also masks these floodings as legitimate user traffic. So you can't really distinguish between the attacks and between real traffic that's coming through. And if you can't distinguish it, you don't have an effective way to stop it, unless you're Google. Because if you're Google, you have enough servers to handle the traffic from the entire world. But otherwise, you're just going to go under. The important note is that distributed denial of service costs a lot of money to the attackers. They have to create a network of a million different machines that are all under their control. These machines are called botnets or zombies. And they have to use these systems to attack a particular target. Now, the important thing is, once they use these systems, a lot of them are going to be discovered and fixed, so they're going to come out of their control. But they spent a lot of time taking control of these machines in the first place. So that's why distributed denial of service costs a lot of money for the attackers, and they're not just going to abuse it by attacking a single person. The other type of attack that we already talked about is social engineering. It's mostly focused on fooling humans. It abuses trust and authority relationships. It's very effective, and it has multiple types on its own. For example, phishing. This is the most important type of social engineering that you need to know about. It's also called a fake page, and it's usually done via fake email. What it does is that it steals passwords, and it targets general audience, so an advanced user can never be hacked by phishing. So as you can see in the example that you see over there, it's using the address Amazon with double N. And they send you this address through an email, and then they create a website that looks exactly like Amazon. So when you click login, you do not suspect anything. You just enter your username and your password, and you send your password to the attacker yourself. A lot of script kiddies use this method to hack you. So if you have someone that wants to hack you, just pay attention to where you enter your password. If you don't enter your password on an attacker controlled form, it's very unlikely that they can actually hack your password. There's also spear phishing. which instead of targeting a general audience, targets a particular person. For example, a lot of companies are hacked with spear phishing. And the advancement of spear phishing is that because it targets a particular person, they can include specific information about the person in the email or in the fake page so that he trusts it even better. And it has a much higher chance of fooling that person into entering his password. The other type of attack is web applications. These are the websites that you interact with. They're on many servers over the internet, and they can also be attacked. They're susceptible to many high-level damaging attacks. These attacks take little effort but have a high impact. So with like 5 minutes of effort, an attacker can take control of a whole server using its web application. And that server doesn't necessarily need to be a tiny server. It can be like the government's military server. It can be the telecommunication infrastructure server. It can be many important targets. There's a company called OWASP, which has a list that's called OWASP Top 10. This list introduces these attacks, the most important web application attacks, with details. The most famous ones of these are SQL injection, XSS, and CSRF. So SQL injection is a web application that typically, first let me say that you don't really need to understand what SQL injection, XSS, and CSRF are. These do not apply to people. These usually apply to web servers, but you still need to know what they are if you want to understand how hackers actually hack servers. So this is one of the most common methods that hackers hack different servers. And a lot of the cases in recent history, for example, the LinkedIn hack, the Experian hack, or 1,000 of other hacks that made headlines in the news, use this method, the SQL injection, or even sometimes combined with the other two that I'm going to talk about. So web applications typically use a database to manage user data. These databases use a language that's called SQL. It's a programming language. And these applications receive input from their users, such as username and other user information, add it to a SQL query, and send that SQL query to the database. And the database runs it and returns the results. That's how they handle user data. The apps usually show the result of that query from the database or use it for other purposes. SQL injection happens when the user input changes the semantic of that query. So for example, if an application wants to get the list of products from the server, from the database server, and show it to the user, an SQL injection would instead make it return usernames and passwords instead of the database, instead of the products. And then the hacker has access to all usernames and passwords. We can see a demo of SQL injection.